Hello there and welcome to the first game of the World Chess Championship match. The match between the challenger Jan Nepomniachtchi from Russia and the reigning champion Magnus Carlsen from Norway. Equally anticipated, it's finally upon us, and well, I was eager to see what Jan Nepomniachtchi would play on the first move, and he opened the match with pawn to e4. And Magnus took a moment here. Of course, I'm sure he decided before the match what he wanted to play. Against Carlsen, he always played e5. Against Caruana, the last match, he played c5, the Sicilian. This time he went with e5, which has more or less been his tried and trusted repertoire in these World Championship matches. Now Nepo played pretty quickly here. He played knight f3, knight c6, and bishop e5. Nepomniachtchi has also played stuff like the Scotch, but he went with bishop e5, the Ruy Lopez, one of the oldest and most respected openings in chess. And for the first few moves, we got basically more or less what we would expect. The main line: bishop e7, rook e1, b5, bishop e3, and castles. So Carlsen is offering white to play c3 here, which is the main move, when he would probably go for d5, which is the so-called martial attack. But what Nepo does here is play the move h3. And this is also what Carlsen did in their World Championship match. And now Carlsen is on Nepo's team, and also Potkin, who was Carlsen's second during his match. So Carlsen is saying, okay, you want to have a look again here? I have a surprise. And after h3, he played a rare move that has not been seen often here, knight to a5. And it's pretty clear why it's rare, because it gives up this pawn on e5. So already on move 8, Carlsen is offering up a pawn sacrifice. Now, Nepomniachtchi accepted relatively quickly. Carlsen took on b3. So Carlsen gets the bishop here and he doubles white's pawns here. Pretty insignificant at the moment, but the bishop pair is always, some compensation for a pawn. And bishop b7 comes here with an attack on the pawn on e4. White has to defend it. He chose to play d3 to defend the pawn and not d5. When you have the two bishops like this, you want to open up the position. So black plays d5. He's trying to get rid of this pawn, because then this bishop would have more scope on the long diagonal. White doesn't really have a choice. If you play a passive move like f3, you're weakening your king. This diagonal is up for grabs, and black has a lot of pieces. He could play a move like rook e8, and he's already threatening maybe a bishop here, and we have a attack on this knight. Something active like this. So white, after d5, Nepomniachtchi took on d5, queen takes d5, and now we have a pretty massive threat here on g2, checkmate threat, and white has to deal with it. Again, f3 is pretty bad, and Nepo did not play that. I can just show you maybe a check, maybe a bishop check, or even a queen check, because we can't put anything here. We take this, and once the king moves, knight here and here, and this is already pretty dreadful for white. So queen f3 is relatively forced to stop the mate, and black plays bishop d6. This move carries a nice threat. If white plays a move like knight to c3, black will take on e5, and this opens up an attack on the queen. If you were to take this, I give you mate here on the back rank. If you take on e5, I take on f3, and I am up a piece, right? So you can't take back because the rook hangs. But Nepomniachtchi, he played pretty quickly here, and he played the computer #1 choice, and that's king f1. Very good move, and this adds protection to the rook. So the line we just looked at does not work anymore. Again, Carlsen answered pretty quickly, and he played rook f to b8. And there was a funny moment, because the board that translates the move out to the internet, to the audience, at first it showed the move rook f to c8, because on the way it senses the rook goes over the square, and it sent out the move rook f to c8. And I saw people analyzing it for a while, but the move played was rook f to b8, and the idea is to protect the bishop. So now the queen trade is relatively forced, and white goes for it. Queen takes d5 and knight takes d5. So black has sacrificed the pawn, but he has very active pieces. His bishops are quite nice, centralized knight. He wouldn't mind, centralizing the rooks a little bit more. But white still needs to get the pieces out, and he starts to do so with bishop d2. But Black grabs more space with c5. Knight goes back to f3. Black starts to, fix the rooks. We have to somehow get this guy out, which is a little bit problematic because knight b4, which is what Nepomniachtchi played, the most natural move is not with knight b4. And now you have to spend the move to protect this pawn. And Nepo chose the e rook. Note that black can, whenever he wants, take on f3 and damage white's pawns, but for the moment he prefers to keep the bishop pair. Rook a to c8, so black now fixed the rooks, and all his pieces are active. White starts to, reroute his pieces, knight to e2, knight c6. Black wants the knight to, control more squares on the king side, put it maybe on g6 or f5, bishop to e3, and knight e7. Now, having just played bishop e3, white's next move is a little bit, it's the first move where white kind of goes wrong. Not like a blunder, but let's call it an inaccuracy. Still, the supercomputers think that white is slightly better. He's up a pawn, but it's very difficult in a practical game, in a human game, to make this extra pawn count. And it seems like Nepomniachtchi wanted, clarity, and he wanted to get rid of the bishop pair, so he played bishop f4 here. But this makes the position a little bit too simple and even gives white some problems. So now Carlsen took an f3. We have to take because we can't do this because of the Zwischenzug. Bishop takes check. So this is forced, and now we take this and rook c6. So Carlsen defends the pawn. This rook is also ready to come maybe to f6 to put pressure. In some cases h6 to put pressure here. Rook e1, and now we see this knight coming to f5. And this knight has its eyes on especially the d4 square. And if you land there, we have two weak pawns, so white is kind of forced to play c3 here. Knight h4, attacking the pawn, and rook e3. And here's maybe the first moment where Carlsen could have played better. He played king f8, but the move g6 is very subtle, and it's simply threatening to play rook f6. Rook f6 hits the knight, and we threaten to win the pawn back. And there's not much you can really do about that. Because let's say, I think something like king e2, well, king e2 is maybe not a great move. But the point is, if we make a blank move, it's maybe hard to make a blank move. Let's say rook somewhere, like rook here, just to make a move. We attack, the knight moves, and then knight f5. And then we win this pawn. And the main point is in some lines, especially, rook a5 was not a good move. After g6, something like knight e2. Then g6 matters, because now we can play this move, rook e5, and the knight is protected, and we take this pawn. So that's sort of the main point of g6. So king f8 was played, knight g2 offering a trade. Black doesn't want it, because, well, this knight is not ideally placed here on g2. Rook e5, now g6, and the white, has to defend this pawn. So, and now you see the difference. We had to protect the knight, so now white has time to defend the pawn on d3, knight to e1. Carlsen wants to reroute the knight again, put it on e6. First he plays f5, and now knight e6. And now he's both eyeing this square, which is quite juicy, and this square. But to get to d4, we need to undermine this pawn. So at some stage, he might want to go for this. So knight e2 to keep the knight out of f4, but not b4. And this we absolutely can't take, because then the knight gets to d4. So despite still being up a pawn, it's actually white who's on the back foot here, and black is doing a little bit of pressing. King e2 trying to shore up everything, rook to b8. And white now has to give up a pawn. If you take on b4 again, knight d4 might come immediately. King d2 was played, but now you can't protect this pawn. So Carlsen took and regained his pawn. But white has sort of, fixed his pieces. Rook goes back to b7, h4 now, capturing some squares on the king side. King f7, rook e to e1. Carlsen improves his king. It's an endgame. Knight to e3, and here the last move before the time control. And Carlsen played rook d7, and he was unhappy. He thought he should have played knight f4, which gives him again the slightly more preferable position. but the end result would probably be the same, a draw. He played rook d7, and after knight c4, white is threatening all of a sudden to give a fork here to win a rook for a knight, so Carlsen played rook e7, but this is an open invitation to a repetition because knight e5, and the rook has to keep an eye on this pawn. So after knight d6, rook d6, knight c4, hitting the rook again, etc. They repeated 3 times and the draw was agreed. So having been under pressure for, well, more or less after bishop f4, Nepomniachtchi was happy to take the draw. Carlsen maybe wanted to punish him a little bit more and play on in the endgame, because that's what he likes to do. You know, he likes to play these long games and you know, tire out the opponent, because he's always in very good physical shape, and that's been one of his weapons in these World Championship matches. But okay, the first game under the belt, it's a draw. I think Magnus Carlsen can take the moral victory. Seems like he was better prepared and didn't have any real problems. But the fight will go on, and now, you know, a lot of things happen in the background. You know, what you know, does the team prepare? Will Magnus Carlsen keep on playing e5 again against e4? Will he go back to the Sicilian? You know, all these things. And already for the second game, Magnus will have the white pieces. What will he go for? I have a suspicion he might go for d4, and we might see some kind of an attack on the Grunfeld, if indeed Nepomniachtchi sticks with the Grunfeld. But I guess we'll see game 1 under the belt. Hope you enjoyed it. I'm really looking forward to what we're going to see in the next few days, and yeah, hope to see you again. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.